Hello everyone and welcome to this week's Patch Notes, a show where we cover the biggest gaming news from the week in a nice bit-sized package. My name is Drew and as always it's great to see you guys. This episode we are covering the news from the week of October 27th, 2017. As always I record these a bit early, so if there are any updates to the news stories that you see in this episode, you can see them down below in the comments where I'll be updating as the week goes on. Anyway, we have a lot to get into this week, so let's go ahead and get started. Alright, so we're starting off with something that has me pretty damn excited. Microsoft has officially released their first wave of backwards compatible original Xbox games. The list of games in this wave include The King of Fighters Neo Wave, Blood Rain 2, Red Faction 2, Sid Meier's Pirates, Grabbed by the Ghoulies, Black, Dead to Rights, Psychonauts, Prince of Persia The Sands of Time, Fusion Frenzy, Crimson Skies High Road to Revenge, Ninja Gaiden Black, and most importantly, Star Wars Knights of the Old Republic. The reason that's so important is because LucasArts and then EA have kind of just ignored the Knights of the Old Republic series and kind of just put it off as, oh, it just leads up to the MMO and really just left it at that. So it's really cool that they're actually acknowledging that this game exists and letting people play it again. Now the reason this has me so excited is because I review old original Xbox games. So it's pretty cool to see games that I was planning to review or have already reviewed show up on this list. One example being Black. I reviewed Black a few months ago, you can see the review right here, and while it hasn't aged very well, it still has some of the best sound design and music in any FPS to date. All of these games run at 1080p, or as close to it as they could possibly get within reason, because not all of them are 16:9, they couldn't convert all of them to take up all that space, but that's okay, they're old games from a standard def era. But they also boast smoother frame rates and shorter load times. To add to that, Microsoft has stated that when the Xbox One X releases next month, these games will be able to perform even better on that system. The coolest thing for me here is how you actually play these games. All of them are available digitally on the store for $10 to $15. But if you still have an old disc from back in the day, you can just pop it right in your Xbox and play it. You don't have to pay for anything. And I think it's kind of amazing that they really took advantage of the fact that people still own these discs, and it's really nice that if you still own these kinds of games because you really cherish them or you really just love them, that Microsoft's acknowledging that and you can just play it because you do own it. And I know this is how they handle things with the Xbox 360 backwards compatibility, you could just pop your disc in and play it, but it's still cool that they're willing to support these discs that are over a decade old. I'll keep you guys updated on the list of backwards compatible games. If there's a game that comes out that I like or would recommend to you guys, I'll be sure to let you know in the patch notes.
Now that the suppression field's down, we all have to do our part.
Dad?
Can you blame an old man for wanting grandkids?
In other news, we unfortunately lost an incredibly important voice in the industry this week, and one that you would undoubtedly recognize. Robert Guillaume, and I really hope I'm pronouncing that right, passed away this past Tuesday due to complications with prostate cancer. You may recognize him as Dr. Eli Vance from the Half-Life franchise, both in likeness and voice, but he is mostly known for playing Rafiki in the Lion King movies. Now I don't want to dwell on this too long because I didn't really know the guy, but I just wanted to really pay respects to how well he brought the character of Eli Vance to life, especially for me. As you guys probably know by now, Half-Life 2 is my favorite game of all time, even higher than Half-Life. I mean, the sentimental value is just up there. But even without that sentimental value, the story is fantastic, and it's all due to the characters that help bring everything to life, and the characters you grow to love over time. And the reason we love these characters so much is because they were so well realized by their voice actors and their actual actors. Robert did a fantastic job of making Eli's personality distinct and memorable, and that's why when he unfortunately... Spoilers for Half-Life 2 Episode 2, how have you not played that yet? Seriously, go play it. It made it that much more emotional when his character passed. The reason I cared for Eli Vance's death is because he was such a great character, and he was so beautifully realized. And I think Robert did a fantastic job, and was very respectful to the character and the source material. So I just wanted to pay my respects. He did a great job, and while I'm sure he's been in a bunch of stuff that I probably haven't seen before, or things that I didn't even know he was in, this is still the one character that I will always recognize his voice from. Alright, let's pick ourselves back up and return to Microsoft, who announced that they are ceasing development of all Kinect models this year. This means that once retailers run out of Kinect stock, they will be gone for good. Microsoft released the first Kinect back in 2010, where it actually broke records as the fastest selling piece of gaming hardware ever, of all time. It blew people away with its ability to sense player movement without any actual physical input by the player, and its, for the time, pretty good voice recognition software. However, when Microsoft released the 2.0 version of the Kinect with the Xbox One in 2010, 2013, the gaming landscape had changed and gamers had mostly decided that they didn't really care about the technology anymore. Kinect 2.0 fought an uphill battle from the very beginning, helped only by the fact that Microsoft vowed to never sell the console without the Kinect, a vow that they immediately stepped back on just a couple years later. Before we knew it, Kinectless bundles started appearing all over the place for, well, less money because they were just cheaper to produce, and then once the Xbox One S came out, it didn't even have a port to connect the, well, Kinect, and you had to use an adapter. This is made worse by the fact that this year, with the Xbox One X that's coming out, which is the most powerful console ever made, it still doesn't have this port, and you still have to use an adapter, which pretty clearly shows Microsoft's opinion on the matter. So yeah, this doesn't really come as too much of a surprise. And I know that the Kinect has a lot of uses for researchers like scientists and universities, but for the consumer, there just isn't really much there to make it more than just a gimmick. To me, the death of the Kinect signals the end of a very long era at Xbox. It's the last remaining remnant of the old way that the company would operate, where they would assume what the future was rather than relying on customer feedback to just move towards what that future actually was. It was cool tech, way cooler than I ever expected, but it just wasn't very useful. Hopefully now with the Kinect out of the back of their minds, Microsoft can continue to push forward and change their image into something that is more gaming focused rather than kind of living room, entertainment center, media focused.
Shit!
Take cover!
Relax, man. It's just a duck.
Oh, bitch got a sick sense of humor.
And for our final bit of news, if you remember from last week, I talked about EA's closure of Visceral Games, who were working on a single-player Star Wars experience for them. Click here to watch that. Since that news broke, people have been talking about single-player games and whether or not they can actually exist in today's microtransaction-laden landscape. Earlier this week, Arcade Berg from Machine Games, the developers of the new Wolfenstein games, stated that he believes that single-player games are doomed in the industry because it no longer supports them. Players tend to play a single-player game, trade it in, and move on, whereas multiplayer experiences keep players engaged for potentially weeks, months, or even years. That, in this developer's opinion, is why single-player games are on their way out. The industry is shifting more towards repeatable multiplayer content instead of isolated single-player experiences. In response to this though, an ex-Visceral dev came out and said that the idea of single-player games dying out was totally absurd. Zach Wilson, who worked on Battlefield Hardline at the now defunct studio, stated that while EA might be gearing towards a multiplayer-focused future, there are still plenty of companies and groups out there that will produce high-quality single-player experiences. He stated that the main thing holding single-player games back is the fact that they are really expensive to make for not a whole lot of repeat business or return on investment. One specific thing he did say though is there's no one single narrative that can be derived from this event other than games are incredibly difficult to make. And the fact that any game or movie gets made at all is cause for celebration. So we have Arcade Berg saying one thing and Zach Wilson saying another. And somewhere in the middle is Shannon Loftus, the head of Xbox's game division. She states that while she doesn't believe single-player games are dying per se, they are becoming less and less economically viable. Considering Microsoft's recent push in all of their games to have some sort of multiplayer component or something with microtransactions, this makes a lot of sense. You also have to keep in mind that Microsoft got burned pretty badly with Quantum Break, a single-player game that reviewed fairly well but just didn't sell enough. However, she went on and stated that there will always be people looking for those single-player isolated experiences. And she thinks that as long as there are people who want to play those games, there will always be people who will make those games for that niche. And that's what I think is really key here. Single-player and multiplayer games don't have to exist in spite of each other. There is balance to be found between these two and what different audiences want. Right now, the casual audience wants a game that they can play with their friends and turn their brains off. And hardcore gamers want single-player experiences like The Witcher 3 that completely engross us. And that's kind of how it's always worked. Just because one type of game is doing really well doesn't mean that the other one is going to completely disappear. Soon, people might even grow tired of multiplayer games and we'll see a resurgence of single-player experiences. Then, when people grow tired of those, we'll see another resurgence of multiplayer games. It's a give and take, an ebb and flow that powers this industry. What drives games forward is people catering to both the big crowds and the small. The reason PUBG is doing so well right now is because it catered to the relatively small battle royale niche in a pretty intuitive way. The reason Call of Duty does well is because it caters to the casual audience and it allows them to have fun and turn their brains off. Both of these experiences can coexist. You as a player can own both of these games. Look at a game developer like Piranha Bytes, the makers of the Gothic franchise of RPGs and the recent Alex game that just came out. Their games don't sell or even even review particularly well, and yet they continue to release vast single-player games because they have a very devoted fan base. They have found their niche, and they'll continue to make their games whether or not they're massively successful. So no, single-player games aren't dying, nor could they ever die. As long as someone on Earth still wants to play a single-player game, they will still exist. The big AAA publishers might be pushing towards a more connected future right now, but that's mostly because that's where the money is. Soon they'll move on to something else, and then we'll have another discussion about how multiplayer games are dying. You see what I mean? Don't panic. Clutch on to your Wolfenstein 2 and your South Park The Fractured Butthole. Ooh, those are two incredibly enjoyable single-player games that just came out. With that in mind, considering that there are no shortage of single-player games to play right now that are brand new, there's really no end to single-player games in sight. And that's just about going to do it for me this week. Thank you guys so much for watching. As always, if you liked the video, please give the video a like, it really helps us out. And if you're new to the channel and you want to see more content like this, go ahead and subscribe. Also, leave a comment below of the last single-player game you played and what you thought of it. I'm really interested to see what you guys have to say. But anyway, thanks again guys, I'll see you next week. Bye.